Alright. So, there were we were discussing doing these with a lot of different movies, but we didn't really know what the outcome was going to be, because nothing really felt totally right.
Correct.
The initial plan was to do 127 Hours with Alive.
Correct.
But then after a while I was thinking, I don't know. And then there was the idea of doing 127 Hours with Buried. I'm not really a fan of Buried. I know I wasn't really a fan of Black Swan either, but I did that. But I felt like there was a movie that I could have done that I both had and liked that would fit with 127 Hours somehow.
Mm.
And sure enough, I turn, and on my shelf, because they're alphabetized, by their letter, because I don't do the numbers first thing, because that's always been weird to me when people do that. Because of that, these are only one movie away from each other on my shelf. The only thing in between them is Only You, the romantic comedy with Robert Downey Jr. and Marissa Tomei. And I was sitting there, and I just happened to see them just sitting there together with Marissa Tomei's face between them, weirdly. And I was just thinking, that's close enough. I never thought about it before, but that's close enough.
Sometimes the best verses can come from out of nowhere.
Yes, ow. So, we are going to go into how they are, we have characters who are used to the hustle and bustle of, like, you know, busy and city life and all that. And they end up out in the middle of nature in one way or another.
Yeah.
Completely and entirely alone with no help whatsoever.
Yep.
And they basically have to survive in the very small area that they have to live in. And they're both true stories, apparently. 127 Hours much more so, because obviously, while Open Water really did happen to two people, pretty much what happened after they were abandoned is all speculation, clearly.
Of course.
But, and of course, you know, obviously, there are some big differences, like, you know, one is land, and one is water, and one is all about its uplifting ending, and one is all about its total, complete fucking opposite of that.
Yeah, no lie.
So, you have triumphant and uplifting, and you have the bleakest of the bleak. We're going to start with 127 Hours. Which was Danny Boyle's kind of Oscar juggernaut following Slumdog. Most people forget just how well this movie did. 6 nominations is a pretty big number.
Yeah.
When one of them is, especially when 3 of them are of the big 8, picture, actor, and screenplay. Now, and this is also kind of what started, you'll notice probably by now that I am a massive, massive James Franco fan.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure this movie is what started that.
Francophile, if you will.
Yes. Which I'm pretty sure I should go and get, like, you know, trademarked.
Yes.
Well, you know, Pineapple Express as well, but... Anyway, so... There was I was a little worried going into this, because I was a little burnt out on Danny Boyle after the Oscar season that Slumdog had.
Yeah.
But then it got to a point where I was really anticipating this, and it was getting a lot of buzz, and there was a lot of Oscar talk about it, and it was really late in the race that I finally saw it.
Yes.
So I saw it, and I fell in love with it, and I was thinking, well, maybe that's because I was just, you know, wanting to see it so badly. But I've seen it probably 5 times now, and I still feel just the same way, so we're good on that. It wasn't like a one-hit kind of thing.
That's a good thing.
We begin and we meet Aaron Ralston, and he is preparing to just go out to Utah and bike and climb around. Because that's just what he does. I almost said did, but dude's still alive, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
He was there at the Spirit Awards with Franco when he won.
Yep.
Only problem is that he doesn't answer his mom's calls, and he doesn't have a cell phone, nor his Swiss Army knife. We see him reaching for it in the cabinet, but he can't, he's not looking, he's just reaching, so he's under the impression that it's just not there, so he just leaves it. Well, and then, he goes out and he meets, the two girls played by Kate Mara and Amber Tamblyn.
Yes.
I forgot her name for a second. And we kind of get to see how his character interacts with other people, because it's kind of hard to get kind of a feel of him when he's just kind of walking around by himself, or biking around by himself, or whatever. It's the cinematography and the landscapes are kind of the star of the movie at that point. It's when the movie slows down and Franco really becomes the star of the movie, when he decides to be the tour guide for these two girls. No ulterior motives or anything. He's just gonna flirt with them a little bit and show them around and have fun and then go on his way. It's like Amber Hamlin's line, or one of their lines, where she says, I don't think we figured into his day at all, as he's running away. And his likability is immediately present. I've always loved the line where he comes down to tell them, where everything is, and he's the only other person there in the mountains with them, and he's wearing, like, the bandana over his face and the sunglasses, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I went a little Friday the 13th on you, and he has that line of, don't worry, I'm only a psychopath on the weekdays, and it's Saturday, so...
It's good stuff.
Now, the great thing that this movie does is, obviously, there was a lot of speculation about how you do a movie where a dude's trapped under a rock for an hour and a half. Naturally. Because that's the kind of questions the general public asks. When do we get to open water?
Yeah.
So, with the way... Danny Boyle's direction lately gets a lot of criticism. Especially for this movie. Because a lot of people accused it of doing the thing where... Maybe Danny Boyle was afraid that people would be bored with the idea of a dude being trapped under a rock for an hour and a half. So he decided to make it as flashy as possible just to make sure people weren't bored. But I'm pretty positive that's not what Danny Boyle was going for. Because here's the thing. What I really love about this also is the beginning credits. And I will tell you why, because it goes into this. What happens is, that song that I love the first half of so much, Never Hear Surf Music Again, is the title of it. And it's just random footage of people, like, rushing around in the city, and, like, buildings, and crowds, and just a bunch of pandemonium and all that. And then we kind of cut in the middle of that into Aaron's life as he's going out. And the beginning credits are happening where we see the names and all that, all the way up to Danny Boyle's name, but they haven't shown the title yet. So, we do all that, and even when he's alone in the desert and just, biking through, it's still like, the soundtrack is really loud, and there's like some really, quick cutting and all that. There's just like a constant, hustle-bustle feel to it.
Yeah.
And then he meets the girls, and they do that. They go to that little, like, utopia where it's, like, the water that they dive in and stuff like that. And then he leaves them, and then he's just climbing along. And then he falls along with that rock and traps him there. And you kind of see him look down at his hand under the rock, and he realizes how stuck he is, and that's when the title just, like, unceremoniously comes up beside him. And the movie's been on for 20 minutes. And the interesting thing about that is because what Danny Boyle was going for with the flashy editing and the loud soundtrack and the random footage of people running around in crowds, is as soon as he falls into that hole and the rock crushes his hand, there is an immediate feeling of isolation.
Oh, yeah.
Like all of that is suddenly gone and will not be back until the end. So, I'm pretty sure that's what he was going for, and I don't think people really gave him the credit for how he managed to accomplish that. Because how else would you? Nothing comes to mind for me immediately of how a director would accomplish the feeling of immediate isolation and the realization of it. And then there's what I really loved about this was, after that, there's kind of a long scene where he thinks if he just gives it enough might, he can just get the rock off and continue on his way. Despite the fact that it's really hard to look at and it's there for the whole movie too. leading up to the rock, you can see the blood streak on the wall where his hand got caught and slid down. So he knows it's in there, and then we kind of see his desperation. Another brilliant thing that Danny Boyle did, and something that speaks to Franco's performance, by the way, what we'll get into in a minute, is you immediately feel yourself there because of the realism of the way the movie is. And you get frustrated with Aaron because of just how it's so frustratingly absurd how this happened.
Yeah.
And like the odds were totally and completely against something like this happening.
You feel his pain, literatively and figuratively.
So there is that moment where we have the scene where he's trying to just kind of get the rock off, but it's getting worse and worse, and he's getting more and more frustrated, and he just has to start screaming out of frustration. And we see that moment where it's that horrible moment where we realize the isolation for ourselves, because we think, well, he's in a crevice, but there's, an opening there, people can hear him. So we get that shot of him screaming the names of the girls for help, and the camera pans out, and when it pans out all the way, his voice is getting softer and softer, and when the shot is finally over, we can't hear him at all, and the crevice that he's in has now turned into, the ever slightest crack in the earth. And there's absolutely no way nobody could know he's down there unless they actually beat the odds and come across him, which of course never happened. But the thing that they did to get Franco really in that moment is, I guess Danny Boyle said, okay, just act like you're trying to get the rock off your hand, but you can't move it at all. And Danny Boyle would just run the camera for 20 straight minutes and never call cut, and just let Franco get more and more into it and more frustrated by it until they got enough footage to cut what we see. There's a reason he's got one of those little gold people,
Yeah, no lie.
Say what you will about Slumdog, but, and then there are those, and sometimes these moments kind of lose me in the movie a little bit. They kind of take me out of it a little bit. I don't know how other people feel about them. Well, there's two kinds, really. There's the kinds that work and the kinds that don't. There's the whole thing involving his family, where he keeps having flashbacks of them. Treat Williams plays his dad, which is funny.
Yes.
And he keeps having flashbacks to his ex, who was the girl that played Flora Delacour in the Harry Potter movies. And he keeps thinking back to the girls and stuff like that. It's worth noting, everybody loves to joke. Every time this movie's brought up at some comedy show or roast or whatever, everybody brings up the masturbation scene. I've seen this movie 5 times, and I'm almost positive he does not jerk off in this movie. I think the scene where he's shivering is mistaken for it.
Maybe.
But I do not, in 5 times of seeing it, I do not recall a masturbation scene or even something that remotely looked like it. I think people think he is when he's thinking back to the girls, maybe. But, yes, I am pretty sure that scene is not in this movie, despite how much you probably have heard about it. And now that that's out of the way, those scenes kind of lose it, but then there's also those scenes where he, goes into, a dreamlike stage where, he imagines himself, just rewinding and how, just how simple it was that he got stuck this way, and how if he could just rewind, how simple it would be to get out of it.
Yeah.
And the dreamlike state of when he's imagining the party that he goes to. It is one of the best uses of it got, shit for this, obviously, because you always do, but to be honest, this is easily one of the most brilliant ways of using product placement ever. Because obviously he has run out of water. I hate that scene so much when he spills the water. Because that's all he had. And he's just growing thirsty. And there's that scene where he is remembering that in his truck is a full bottle of ice-cold Gatorade. And we do that thing where we zoom back really fast from him down in the crevice all the way back to his truck where the Gator is just sitting there in the back waiting. And then he starts to think to all the commercials he's seen for Sunkist and Coke and Pepsi and Mountain Dew and just everything. He's imagining the party that the girls invited him to, where everybody's taking beer out of the ice-cold cooler. And it's worth noting, it's hilarious that this movie has shown that if you're in the right circumstances, there is nothing more alluring than a giant inflatable Scooby-Doo.
Very true.
I just love the way this movie's handled in general, and just its overall appearance. I understand people thinking it's way too flashy, but I don't think that.
No.
I thought it perfectly captured what Boyle was going for. Now about Franco's performance. This was definitely, I would have, who was it? It was Colin Firth. Colin Firth is fantastic in The King's Speech, don't get me wrong.
Yes.
The King's Speech has a really bad reputation, when it really shouldn't. The King's Speech is really, really great. The King's Speech is fantastic, to be honest.
I love The King's Speech.
But if it were me...
Franco would have got the Oscar.
Yeah.
For sure.
More than once, but in this particular case, because there's so many things going on here. There's the obvious physicality, the 20-minute takes of trying to get the rock off, and then just the moment where he's being, a likable, normal guy and being flirty with the girls and all that. And then as this movie progresses and he gets more and more to that breaking point, I always love the moment where, the dust falls and he thinks that it's somebody, so he drops the camera and is just screaming desperately for help. And then he goes back and rewinds the camera and watches himself do that. And then has to turn it off and focus and just tell himself over and over again to not lose it. He absolutely cannot do that. That is the one thing that he's got in this, is his mind. And he just cannot lose it. And then the scene that I think should have, I'm sure secured the nomination and should have secured the win, is the magnificent... It's my favorite scene in the entire movie. The scene where he interviews himself.
Yeah.
Where he's 3 different people. He's doing a talk show host, he's doing himself, and he's doing the person that calls in. And that's when he has all of his realizations. When he says, nobody knows that he's out here, nobody's gonna, go looking for him. At the very least, Brian from work is gonna call in. He's due at work on Tuesday. And then he's going through as the talk show host and saying, so you're telling me that you don't go into work until Tuesday, which means Brian's not going to call it in until Wednesday when it's been 24 hours, which is enough time to call in a missing persons report. But by then, you'll be dead. And then that great moment where he does the oops. And then that realization where he finally... once he says oops, he finally realizes just what he's in, and then things get really serious. And he apologizes to his mom about not answering phone calls, and how if he had answered the phone that day, he probably would have casually said where he was, and he probably would have been rescued by now. And how it all just seemed to be like it was going to be the death of him. But then, the main selling point for this movie happens. There's this great Oscar tradition that, I can't remember who it is, but a website does every year where they take the posters for the Oscar movies and do the honest posters, where it's what the movies are really about.
Yeah, I love these things.
When Django and Lincoln were out the same year in 2012, it was, Lincoln was Slavery Serious Edition, and Django was Slavery Fun Edition. The honest title for 127 Hours was, you have to wait 85 minutes before he cuts his arm off. And that's a scene that hardly anybody can watch.
Yeah.
Honestly, the part where he stabs his arm is really, really fucking bad. The scene where he has to slowly cut it off with a fucking dull pocket knife is even worse. The thing I can't handle is before all of that, when he has to break
his arm,
to get through it. That's the part I can't do.
That's a sickening sound, too. Kudos to the props department for being able to come up with a sound effect like that, because that's nuts. Mm-hmm. It's very realistic.
But that moment gets us to the ending. And you have to be, made of fucking steel for this ending to not get you in some way.
Why?
I love that moment where I was reading comments about this movie when it first came out. And something that, like normally people say, you know, like, oh man, this movie really spoke to me in a good way. But for some reason, there was one guy that just really, like, I totally got where he was coming from, and it really hit me. Where he was saying, so I was going, like, through a really, really tough time when I was watching this movie. Like, it seemed like everything bad that could happen in my life was happening to me, and it just seemed like I had totally hit rock bottom. And I was watching this movie, and when that helicopter touched the ground, I just fucking lost my shit.
I buy that completely.
That moment when the song is playing, what's that band's name? They did a Hobbit Ball and stuff like that. They did. It's a song called Festival, and he's wandering around, and the first thing he sees is a family. And he calls for help, and there's that moment where he finally screams for help, and he's heard, and they come running for him, and he's drinking like all the water he comes across, even if it's in like really, you know, dank, swampy puddles, he still just dives into it.
Yeah.
And then there's the great directorial moment where we realize why the beginning looks the way it does, and we realize Aaron's coming back to civilization where all the hustle and bustle and stuff like that has gone completely away when we've been stranded. But then, as the helicopter takes off with Aaron in it, that stuff comes back to show that Aaron has come back to all of the society and the noise and everything that he took for granted before that. So yes, I think that explains. That's self-explanatory as to why this movie has the impact that it does.
Yeah, definitely.
And why it managed to score a Best Picture nomination.
Very deserved
among
Best
5
Picture
others.
nomination.
It was close there too. Some people think it was fighting the town for that last spot. I think it was Winter's Bone that was fighting the town for the last spot.
Probably.
Which of course Winter's Bone got, but
yeah.
So yes, now we go on to Open Water. Open Water got a lot of ridicule from the public. I remember that.
I didn't like this movie when I first saw it for some reason. I just couldn't get into
You
it.
say first saw, but you probably haven't seen it since, have you?
That is correct.
Because did our theater have this?
Yeah.
Wow, that's weird to me.
I did watch it in my theater.
Okay, so what we have here is, because this is one of those things. This was so frustrating to me. I understand that there are movies that are just simple, and because of that, they, well, for lack of a better word, they fucking blow. Because they're not handled correctly.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of small thrillers out there that get a lot of shit from the public because they're not a lot of things.
Agreed.
This apparently was built up by the public to be like a Jaws type movie. And then everybody saw it and everybody was saying the whole like, all they do is float for an hour, man. And I actually heard somebody say that. Like, for real.
Oh, wow.
Somebody that I knew fucking said that for real. That wasn't like a generalization.
I didn't even say that.
Yes, most people were under the impression of they just float for an hour. What is this? But, you know, there is a thriller in this movie.
Yeah?
We start off with, there are only 2 actors in it, really. Yeah. There's Blanchard Ryan, who is the wife of Steve from Broken Lizard, who was like Mac in Super Troopers, and he was, what was his name in Club Dread? Carlos?
Yes.
I think so, yeah. Something Spanish sounding.
Luis Carlos.
Okay. It's really ironic that he died in water in that movie because now his wife is in peril.
Yeah?
And he's actually in the movie too. He's one of the divers on the boat.
That's right! I thought he looked familiar.
So, and Daniel Travis is the guy's name. And they are a couple. They're not married. They're just boyfriend and girlfriend. And they go through the hustle and bustle of life. They're very business oriented. He criticizes her for bringing her laptop on the trip with her. But they're just going to go on vacation and try to get rid of that stuff anyway, and just kind of, you know, let it go for a little while. And then she comes back to the hotel one day and says, you know, hey, I plan for us to go deep sea diving and, you know, scuba diving, whatever you want to call it. diving very far, dangerously, where you can swim with sharks and all that shit. But it's with a group, and with professionals and all that. And it's already clear that they have a rocky relationship, because they kind of have that, they give each other the glares, and then there's the moment where they're in bed together and everything's ready, but then they just don't, because the mood's not there. Something is kind of not right between them, and this relationship could be like on the rocks and on the verge of death.
Yeah.
Which may be another reason they're taking this vacation. They don't really specify.
Possibly.
So, here's the thing. What happens here is, it's another one of those things where it's frustrating because what happens because of an absurd accident. While they're on the boat, there is this douchebag guy that's making a scene because he forgot his mask. And without his mask, he can't dive. So he's the only one stuck on the boat while everybody else gets to dive. But then one couple comes back up because the wife was having trouble. She has trouble with her hearing, so she couldn't do it anymore. So the douche convinces her to give him her mask so that he can go diving with the husband, because you have to have a buddy with you. He had to convince the husband to go with him. So everything's fine, but the trouble is just to make sure everybody's rounded up, the guy that's running it has been doing a head count. But because of this little mix-up with the guy that forgot his mask and the guy that went in twice, there was a miscount.
That makes sense.
So they all go, and Daniel Travis's character is distracted by an eel. So they go and they chase after the eel and play with it. And everybody else gets back on the boat, and because of the miscount, they're under the impression that everybody's on board, so they leave. And they were in the middle of fucking nowhere. So they come back up, and they have been totally abandoned in shark-infested waters. And the rest of the movie is how they deal with this. For starters, they are not just floating in the water for an hour, because it's a good 35 minutes in before they're even abandoned, and the movie's only 79 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's about 45 minutes of where the movie's really at. And we occasionally cut back to land to kind of show, I guess, the contrast of, them being stranded out in the middle of just water. And of course, they're still in their wetsuits and all the equipment, so they're able to stay afloat for as long as they need to. And then the shit starts to hit the fan when they realize they can no longer see what is underwater with them, and all they can do is feel shit that's happening to them.
Yeah.
On top of the fact that she is getting seasick. And the fact that they're in the middle of the ocean and the current is so strong, they have no idea where they are because they're going wherever the current takes them. Even if the boat were to realize what happened and come back for them, they'd probably be impossible to find. So there are those moments where there are those great moments that are just a real suspense. Not just the whole, she's being nicked and she doesn't know what's going on down there, and whether it's fish or whether it's a shark's tooth or whatever, and it builds progressively as, the stakes rise of what it could be. There's that great, there's one point where they just get stung by jellyfish. That's okay, that fucking hurts, but it's no big deal. Because they're in salt water, that'll neutralize stuff, or however that works. And there's at one point where it gets really bad, where they get stuck in a thunderstorm, which is a really well shot scene where it goes completely black and it's briefly illuminated by lightning, and it just really helps that feel of helplessness.
Yeah.
It's so weird how difficult it is to relate to being stranded in the middle of water, yet somehow you feel how real the fear is. And there's that great shot where he's kind of helping her float, and then he falls asleep and kind of drifts away from her. So we get an overhead shot, and she's she's kind of floating in the water asleep, not realizing it. And underneath her, we can see 5 sharks just kind of circling her. That's a really great shot. And it's worth noting that it's really cheaply shot, because you can't take real movie cameras out into the middle of the fucking ocean, which I guess is how they just really shot it. It's all shot with small handheld digital cameras, which is why it basically has the look of a found footage movie, but it's not. Especially the scenes in the hotel. When it's like they're just kind of doing the slow burn thing and he's just looking for a bug to kill. Yes, what really makes it is how well the acting is and how great of chemistry the two actors have. It's worth noting the acting isn't that great when they're on land, but once they're in peril, they really like when they had to be kind of natural, like a natural couple. That scene kind of
forced.
Yeah, kind of clunky and amateur-y and stuff like that. But once it got to the point to where they were in the water with real sharks, which apparently was the case, that fear and stuff really makes it real. Like, so it doesn't stay that way. Thank God. This movie would have been like a huge subject of ridicule if it had bad acting in it, because that's really what it rests on for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And then you just get the absolute helpless ending, where he does eventually get bit by a shark and bleeds out, and she just kind of lets him go. And the last shot of the movie, like, I wasn't even sure I had actually seen the end when I saw this the first time. I was like, did I just miss something, or is that really how it ended? Where after he has died and she's let him drift off, she just gives up. And the last shot of the movie is her in the water, and she just lets go of all of her gear and then just sinks herself. And then it just ends. And then we kind of figure what their fates might be, because during the credits, there's a shark is caught by fishermen, and they cut it open, and their camera falls out. So we know that the worst of the worst happened, and it could not possibly be more bleak or more opposite of the ending of 127 Hours.
Yeah.
Not just the, uplifting ending by itself, but just while both movies are really good, there's just Hoop on Water is a good movie, but I think 127 Hours definitely achieves a level of greatness to where it surpasses quite a bit. So that's what I would go with.
Alright, it ends another Versus edition, and next week we're going to bring up some confusion. Good way to put it without giving anything away.
I guess so.
And then we're going to end the month of November with one more, and that's actually going to play up something that is going to be coming out in theaters that same week. So
yeah, I had to reverse. That's why I thought yours was weird.
Yeah, now it makes sense. And then December, we start all over again. So very soon, we're also going to have a brand new Academy Awards prediction video coming up the next couple weeks. So
and it'll be very different.
Yeah, no lie. Stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for the rest of the videos on Pop. Wrestling returns, obviously, tomorrow, and we'll lead into the vlog of randomness on Wednesday, Sip and Snack on Thursday, back to AJ's movie reviews starting on Friday. AJ, any parting words?